This is what these sheets look like that are coming home to you. This is from lesson 13, but even if you're getting one from lesson 150, they still follow the same format. So we're going to talk through each of the individual components. Before we dive in, we need to talk about some really important terms that are sort of key to understanding the science of reading, which is a term you've probably heard teachers use or just heard in the news about how children learn to read. The first key term is phoneme. Phoneme means the smallest unit of sound in a word. For example, the word dog has 3 phonemes: d, a, g. Now, a grapheme is the way that we write that sound down. That's different than just the sound on its own. When we're writing out the graphemes for the word dog, that's the familiar letters that we've seen in how we would write a word. So phoneme is sounds, grapheme is letters or writing. Let's talk about how that matters with the practice that you can do with your child at home. So at the top of that sheet that you have from your teacher, you have the new concept and sample words. In bold, we've got the letter D. That's telling us the new concept that your child is working on is the letter D and the sound that the D makes. How can you actually use these to work with your child? Let's talk about that. The 2 ways that I really like to use these words are by blending and segmenting. And so let's use the word dip as our example for how we might practice blending and segmenting. So here's my little blender robot that I talk about. Her name is Blenda. And with Blenda, I might show some cubes. And I would say to my student, or I'd say to my child, if I was working with my own child at home, I'd say, all right, I'm gonna say some sounds, some phonemes, and I want you to blend those sounds together and tell me what word it is that I am making. And so they wouldn't be able to see the word written out here, dip. That would be invisible to them. You would have that covered up. And instead you'd say, okay, so the first sound is d. The next sound is I. The last sound is p. D, I. What happens when we blend those sounds together? Dip, dip. Oh, we get the word dip. Now you don't have to use cubes. You could also use your fingers. D, I, p. Dip, dip. Or another way I really like to do this is I like to do it on my arm. So I tap the sounds d, I, p, and then I'd sort of wipe them together. Dip, dip, and I'm sort of blending. And that's a great way for our more physical students to sort of feel what we're talking about when we're talking about blending the sounds. Okay, the next way you can practice is with segmenting or breaking apart those sounds. So I have a little robot that I've created here, Siggy the Segmenter. And I like to imagine that the word is a puzzle and we are trying to break apart the pieces of the puzzle. And those pieces would be the phonemes, the individual sound. So we would say to our students, okay, so the word is dip. Can you tell me the sounds in dip so that Siggy could understand? And I might use my cubes again, as I tend to do. And I go, d, let's see, dip, dip, d, d, I. And I'd sort of work to stretch those sounds out. Another thing you could do at home, I really like these little fidget toys. These are something I found at the dollar section at Target, but I've seen them in lots of dollar sections. And they're sort of like these rubber bandy fidgets, and you can stretch them. So you can actually imagine using this as a way of sort of stretching out the word dip to try to hear the sounds. Again, this is a great tool for working with our more squirmy learners who need to be moving. So we might say, okay, dip, dip, dip. Oh, and I say dip, dip, dip. And we're just sort of getting those letters stretched farther and farther apart, imagining stretching out the word, and then we can snap it back together, dip. Okay, so there's different ways we can practice, but the whole point is always seeing if we can make it fun and enjoyable and sort of gamifying these elements of how we read. And so then you could go through and do that with all the words that your child has on their list. So we could do that for did, dip, sad, nod, and mad. And even if you only do it for a few, it's still great to be practicing because that practice at home is going to be mirroring the practice they do at school. And that's just going to continue to help them to grow as a reader. Next section of your practice page, we've got our word work chains. Now the word work chain is meant to strengthen the reading and spelling skills that your child is working on at school. Here's how it works. You're going to guide your child to spell a word, like for example, the word mad, and then you'll ask them to make a change to one letter to make a new word, like changing the or the M in mad to an S. And then what would that make? Oh, that would make sad. This sort of back and forth practice is a great challenge for students, and it helps to solidify their learning. So I'll show you how I would do that. Included in your half sheet, you also have a script for how to say this to your child. So here's how you can use this sample script at home. I'm going to speak as if I'm the grown-up guiding their child through this at home, and then the writing, my hand here, let's pretend that's the child writing. Okay, so here's the first thing I would like you to do. I would like you to write the word mad, mad, and I'll probably emphasize it and say it slowly for them so they really hear me say it. So then our child will start reading mad, mad. Okay. Oh, great job. You wrote mad. Now change the M in mad to an S. Okay. I'm going to change that S. Down an S. And now what word do you have there? Sad. Sad. I wrote sad. Okay, now what do you need to do to change sad to tad? Sad to tad. Tad. Oh, and if they need help, you could help them sound and stretch that word out. You can segment it out. Tad. And then finally, I'd like you to change the T in tad to a P. What word would that be? Had. Beautiful. Can you read all the words that you just wrote? Mad, sad, tad. Your child will also be learning irregular words at school. So irregular words are words that don't follow typical spelling patterns. Like, for example, the word said. So these are tricky words that students need to learn by heart. Some of these words are always going to be irregular words, like the word said, and some of them are temporarily irregular because your child hasn't learned that spelling pattern yet. Let's talk a little bit about the word said. So if I was to review this at home with my child, I'd first want to say, well, what is this word here? Oh, this is the word said. Let's say the word together, said. Now, let's see if we can tap how many sounds there are. S, e, d. Remember, we're talking about those phonemes. We're not talking about the letters. We're talking about the sounds. S, e, d. There are 3 sounds in the word said. What's the first sound we hear? S. What's the middle sound? E. What's the third sound? D. We hear 3 sounds. Now, what is the part of this word we need to learn by heart? It's actually that middle section. That eh sound is irregular because normally A and I don't make eh. They usually make a different sound. And that's why we need to learn the word said by heart because it is making an unexpected sound, said. And so we would talk about this word, and your child will have already learned this word at school. So you could ask them, why is this word irregular? And if they can explain it to you, that means that they're understanding why this word is irregular and why they need to know it by heart. So those are those irregular words. Now, the next thing that they're going to practice is the sentence practice. And this is sort of where you connect all the skills your child has been working on in school and enables them to really read, not just one word, but to read a sentence, to read for information. There's a few different ways that I like to practice these sentences with students, and I will show you a few of those ways, and you can choose which one you and your student want to do at home. So the first thing I like to do is before I do any reading, I like to go ahead and circle the punctuation. So circle the end mark. You see I circled that period. And then I like to underline each word. The reason I do this is so that the child can see, okay, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 words. They can know before they start reading, they are going to be reading 4 words. This can help them track it. Another way that I like to do this is to do it with a highlighter. It's essentially the same thing. Some children like to underline, some children like to highlight. Either is fine. It depends what you have at home. The other way that I like to do this is by using an object to mark each word. And so in this case, using some cereal, just to give a sense of, okay, I'm going to be reading 4 cereal circles worth of words. And actually, if you're using cereal, then you could just eat each piece as you read. So now that you've established you've got 4 words you're going to be reading, then you can start reading them. So you'd say, okay, what's the first word? First word, I. Okay, what's the next word? Am. And for students reading this word, they would know, oh, that A sound is actually that nasalized A, and they would have learned about that, and they can tell you about that. Okay, I am, third word, ought. Not. I am not. See, I went back and read all 3 words. Finally, what's that 4th word? Sad. Sad. Let's read the whole thing. I am not sad. And so then once you've read this, you can actually talk about, well, I wonder why the person who wrote this is not sad. And you can talk about it. And in talking about this simple sentence, you're helping your child to build their future comprehension skills and help them to think more about what they read when they're reading more complex sentences. So though it seems simple, this is building a really, really critical skill, which is your child's ability to think about and make sense of what they are reading. The reason all these elements are so important is because little by little, your child will be growing all of their skills all of their knowledge, their sort of toolbox as a reader. And you will keep getting these practice sheets coming home with you, these guides, and they will keep having the same practice elements. You can see on my page up here, this is for lesson 66. It still has the same components, but they're going to grow with complexity. And as the complexity grows little by little, so will your child be blooming as a reader, and so will you be blooming in your ability to support them as a reader. And that's why this is such an important practice. Practicing with your child doesn't have to take a lot of time or energy. Even just a few minutes of working on these skills can be a simple way to connect with what your child's working on at school and help support your child as they bloom as a reader.